session today. Welcome to the session today. My name is Anne Neumann, together with Adonis and Laila Dar up in the corner there. We are together joining and sharing the session as a team effort. And you're all very excited because there will be 3 very different presentations. And each of you has a certain amount of time available. You have been instructed beforehand, I guess, right? We go in the order of the program, which I do not have had hand at the moment, but Huang, do you start?
Yes, in the program, yes.
I have a feeling for programs. Okay, so I think the idea is that you present, we will take questions afterwards if there's time, if time allows, and then we continue with the second speaker who will be introduced by Adonis. Okay, so he has time to look it up now. Good, Juan, the floor is yours. You know that you have very exciting listeners. We will take notes and your time starts now.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my screen. While it's loading, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Huang. I'm a second year PhD student in University College Dublin, Smurfit School of Business. And I would like to thank the organizing team as well as the award committee for this conference, which is very meaningful for a research student like me in energy economics to present our work, sharing and learning from the senior researcher as well as our fellow students. So I truly appreciate it. For my research, please kindly note that this is still at its very nascent stage. So any feedback, suggestions on it are very much appreciated. You can hear me well, right? Okay, that's great. Thanks. Okay, so let me start with a quote by Gita Gopira, the first Deputy Managing Director of International Monetary Fund. Global economic ties are changing in ways we have not seen since the end of Cold War. Foreign direct investment flows are being redirected along geopolitical lines. So this very much reflect the reality that now we are seeing unprecedented energy crisis, particularly due to the oil supply disruption caused by recent geopolitical tensions such as Russia-Ukraine war, the Middle East war, that have placed energy security at the top of the political agenda. In this context, developing and integrating renewable energy, which is the homegrown energy, is being recognized more and more as essential for a secure, sustainable, and affordable energy system. And because of this, securing the access to energy transition critical minerals is now a strategic priority. This is evidenced by surging demand of lithium, nickel, cobalt, rare earth elements required for renewable energy generation and integration, such as EV, battery storage, renewables, and grid networks. And according to the IEA, lithium demand rose by nearly 30%, significantly exceeding the 10% annual growth that we've seen in the 2010s. So a growing number of work has been developed by international organizations around critical minerals. This includes the recent report by UNTA, Critical Decisions, Industrial Policy for Energy Transition. Also the IAEE Yearly Global Critical Minerals Outlook and the new trade database in critical minerals by Asian Development Banks and World Trade Organization. But in contrast to the growing expectation for future demand that I mentioned before, investment decisions today face significant market and economic uncertainties. So the investment momentum in critical mineral development has weakened since 2024, with spending rising just 5%. It's down 14% in comparison to 2023. So another issue is supply concentration. For example, if you can look at this graph, over 60% of global cobalt refining is concentrated in a single country, China, and lithium production is dominated by a small number of geopolitically contested regions. This means that supply chains are highly exposed to geopolitical shocks like sanctions, export control, export bans, and resource nationalism. Despite this weakening trend of investment and exposure to geopolitical shocks, of the critical mineral value chain, we yet know very little about how foreign investors actually adjust their strategies when geopolitical uncertainty increase, particularly after they have already committed to a certain project. So empirically, several patterns are observed that existing literature do not explain well. For example, ownership patterns, prolonged project delays, phased capital development. Let me take ownership, for example. In the data for Latin America, the global value chains for critical minerals are dominated by multinational enterprises from major capital exporting economies such as China, US, Canada, Australia, and the presence of domestic firms, however, is very limited. For example, firms from Chile, the top regional contributors, account only for 6 out of the 116 lithium projects. In my lithium American sample, the delays from project announcement to investment decision exceeds 18 months. So these observations motivate me to investigate one research question. How does heightened geopolitical uncertainty influence foreign investor real option exercise strategies in energy transition critical mineral investments? So my theoretical framework relies mainly on real options theory. Real option theories, it originates from financial options logic, which has been adapted to strategic decisions making where firms face uncertainty and irreversible commitment. Here, in this case, I operationalize, sorry, it just skipped. Here, I operationalize real option theory through real options reasonings, which refers to the process of embracing an option-based view of investment decisions making, which recognize the significance of proactive planning in strategy. Real options reasonings emphasize how firms structure investment to preserve flexibility by deferring, expanding, switching, or abandoning projects as uncertainty unfolds. Despite the development, however, there remain concerns about real option theory applicability when uncertainty is endogenous, where firms must invest in costly actions or stakeholder engagement, and also questions on real options theory ability to adequately incorporate institutional factors like policy, government commitment that influence manager ability to recognize and exercise the options. And here we see that the energy transition critical mineral this context provide an ideal empirical ground with amplifying uncertainties so that we can advance this theory to address the critics. Example include like shifting mining codes, resource nationalism, community resistance, all affect the viability of expansions or deferral options for investor. So what is my hypothesis? First, the Mintz effect. The key idea here is simple. When uncertainty increases, the option to expand lose values and options to delay gains values. So I have my, so in the investment case specifically, meaning that geopolitical uncertainty increase will lead to two response. One is lower capital expenditure, and two is longer time to final investment decisions. And hence, I have my first hypothesis here. Hypothesis 1A is greater geopolitical uncertainty will reduce the immediate capital expenditures in critical mineral investment, which is the option to expand. And hypothesis 1B is that greater geopolitical uncertainty increase the likelihood of stage investment strategies in critical mineral investment, which is the option to delay. But option exercise is not automatic. It depends on who is investing, where they are investing, and what they have experienced before. Therefore, I introduce 3 moderators: the ownership structure, institutional distance, and previous experience. So strategic owners care about resource security, not just quarterly returns. So they decide to hold on to before deciding. Meaning that, that's the first moderator. The second moderator reflects the fact that firms investing further from home will face greater opacity. And the third moderator reflects the fact that firms with peer exposure to geopolitical shocks have learned routines that dampen the disruption. So more specifically here, I developed 3 hypotheses. Hypothesis 2 is that higher proportion of strategic foreign ownerships weakens the impact of geopolitical uncertainty on options to expand or option to delay. Hypothesis 3 is that greater institutional distance strengthens the impact of geopolitical uncertainty on options to expand or options to delay. And lastly, freer geopolitical exposure weakens the impact of geopolitical uncertainty on options to expand or delay. Today, I will only present the preliminary results for the main effect of the hypothesis 1 that I explained previously. The moderation hypothesis are part of the next phase of my research as I expand the sample and collect ownership data. So that is still work in progress. Now we shift to data and methodology. My sample includes 1,352 firm year observations from 67 firms across Latin America from 2000 to 2024. And I use mainly the S&P Global SNL mentors and mining data. Here I have 2 key dependent variables. First is the option to delay. So I use capex to total assets. This captures how much firms are committing in the near term relative to their asset base. The second is the option to delay, which is operationalized by months to final investment decisions. So this captures how long firm delay irresponsible investment. The independent variable is geopolitical uncertainty, as you see here. And I use the GPR index by Cadera and Iacoviello that they developed in 2022. This counts the geopolitical risks related news coverage in major newspaper. Higher value in this index, meaning that more attention to adverse geopolitical events. And I use both current and lag values to capture adjustment over time. I also include firm fixed effects and cluster the standard errors at the firm level. This helps control for unobserved firm characteristics and within firm correlation. I also use lag specifications to partially address reverse causability, and I'm currently extending robustness checks on this. Let me explain more about the moderator just briefly. So foreign strategic ownership, the first moderator is measured by proportion of shares held by multinational enterprise, state-owned enterprise, and sovereign funds. The data here is from S&P Global Metal and Mining Database as well. The institutional distance is the institutional distance between the home country and the host country, weighted by shares held by investor. And data is also from S&P. And the third moderator is experience with geopolitical exposure. This one is measured by the previous geopolitical exposure by the firm, which is calculated by the presence multiplied with country war uncertainty index. And present is measured by subsidiary counts, asset sales, and project location in any particular country. Data I also use from the S&P Global database. So what is my main preliminary result? I found that hypothesis 1 is supported. So what I found is a strong negative relationship between geopolitical uncertainty and capital expenditure in critical mineral projects. A 1 standard deviation increase in geopolitical uncertainty is associated with a reduction in capex to assets ratio, and this hold across current and lag specification. So my first and second model is testing on the hypothesis related to option to expand. The first one is on the current specification, and the second one is on lag specification. And similarly, I test using model 3 and model 4 on the option to delay, also for current and lag specification. For the second part, so what my evidence found means in practical terms is that the firms in our sample reduce their annual capex commitment substantially in the year of elevated geopolitical tensions. So that's the first part of the hypothesis one. The second part, I found that higher geopolitical uncertainty significantly increased the number of months between project announcement and final investment decisions. So a 1 unit increase in the geopolitical uncertainty index is associated with approximately 3 to 4 additional months before a firm committed capital, which for the large irreversible mining projects represents a meaningful strategic delay. In practical terms, this means that firms are not abandoning projects, they are actually waiting, they are delaying their strategic decisions. And that is how they are exercising the delay options that is predicted by real options theory. For results from hypothesis 2 to 4, as I mentioned, is still pending as I expand the sample and collect my ownership data. So that's the main findings. So in summary, we began by noting that the foreign direct investment flows are being redirected along geopolitical lines. My preliminary result show that redirection happens at the project level. So firms reduce their near-term capital commitments in critical mineral and stretch their decisions timelines when geopolitical uncertainty increase. So at this current stage, this research is making 3 main contributions. The first one, theoretically speaking, it extends the real option theory by shifting the focus from entry decisions to post-entry option exercise. That is a largely unexplored area in international business and energy economics using real option theory. In terms of empirical, secondly, it provides the first multi-country panel evidence on how geopolitical uncertainty simultaneously shapes the expansions and also the delay options, in particular in Latin America critical mineral projects. With a direct measure of, so here I construct the direct measure of delay through months to final investment decisions. And in terms of policy for the host countries where the mining project is actually located, the findings imply that institutional instability can act as a multiplier for the effect of geopolitical tensions globally. So in more simple terms, host governments that reduce these multipliers, meaning that they reduce their in-country geopolitical risk through a mechanism like stable mining codes, transparent enforcement, credible de-risk mechanism for investor, can partially offset the dampening effect of global geopolitical uncertainty on investment. And as I expand my sample and introduce more ownership data, the next phase of this research will test whether the strategic owners, the institutional distance, and prior geopolitical exposure moderate these effects. And what does that mean for designing like the investment framework for critical mineral that support energy transition progress? So this will conclude my presentation. Thank you all for your attention, and I welcome any comments, suggestions, or questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chong, for your interesting presentation. We have time for 2 questions. Are there any questions from the audience? Any immediate reactions? Anything you always wanted to know about Latin American critical minerals? If you don't, you can still think about one, right? So I obviously have a question, and I was looking at this very detailed work that you were carrying out, the huge amount of hypotheses that you are trying to test with that data set. It feels like you need all these hypotheses because you want to make use of the data set that you have created, right? I mean, you could also think about separating it. I was wondering, when you yourself look at your results, which you have at the moment, is there anything that you find surprising?
Yes. So I think not in, thank you for your questions. I think it's not like surprising to me on the findings and the implication of it for Latin America, but I have actually doubts on it because I see like strong effects here, but I aware that this one is only applying for like it show the result of the current sample that I have, which is focusing on Latin America. But my wonder at the moment is that if it can be generalized for other regions, and there are other regions in the world that is also very interested to look at this particular question, namely like Africa and Southeast Asia, where the reserve of critical minerals are based, and also they have geopolitical tensions. But unfortunately, one challenge that I have is that the geopolitical risk index that I'm using, it doesn't have the index measure for these countries. So I really want to expand my empirical evidence outside of the Latin America to see if it's really whole for other regions. But what I will need to do in order to do that is to find an alternative of the geopolitical index measure. So here I really appreciate if there's any suggestion on approach how to do that. Yep.
Thank you. I will check in a paper where we included some geopolitical risk measure. What was the source there? And I can share that with you afterwards. Adonis, you have a question?
Yes, if nobody else does. So your data span, I believe, is it 2000 to 2024? Is that correct? So within that period, were there any very discrete jumps in your geopolitical uncertainty index? So I can think of 2022 would be a good example. 2001 would be another good example. Are there other instances of this in that time period?
Yes, you are really right. The two major one that I see is 2021, so the very beginning of the time period, and also after 2020 22. But around 2008, there's also a small spike, but not as significant as the other two.
But that would have been, I thought, a financial phenomenon as opposed
Yes,
to a geopolitical risk phenomenon that might have translated into a geopolitical risk. So,
yes,
from a
exactly.
modeling perspective, do you think that it makes sense to have a discontinuity type approach? Or at least partitioning to see things if the relationship has changed in your regressions, whether the relationship has changed in some fundamental way, whether coefficients have changed. Now, you'll have too short a time period from 2022, but from 2000 and maybe from 2008, there might be, all I'm suggesting is that there may be the opportunity to divide this 25-year period into subperiods and see whether the coefficients are stable over time.
Yes, I think that would be a very like useful suggestion for me. I will certainly look into that. Thank you for your suggestion. Yes.
Very good. Thanks, everybody. I do have to cut this short now because we have to stay in the time. Thank you very much for your presentation, Wang. You will hear from me via an email with an index. And I hand over to my dear colleague, Adonis.
Thank you, Anna. So our next presenter is Monica Pereira Enriquez. I apologize for the pronunciation. And she will be speaking on optimal carbon pricing for green hydrogen adoption. Her co-authors are Boris Ortega, Gilbert Frigen. And Monica is from the University of Luxembourg. We look forward to your presentation.
Okay. Can you see my screen or not?
Not.
Okay. It's asking me to quit and reopen Zoom. So I will just quickly do that if that's okay with you.
Well, maybe we can change order then, Adonis.
Is that okay? So I was going to hand the introductions over to Layla. So Layla, are you in a position to, because you were actually the main protagonist in this saga involving Anna and you and myself. But if you don't have it handy,
I don't have the list in front of me.
okay. So the author is Jacobus Nell, apologies for pronunciation, from the University of Pretoria. And his presentation is on electric vehicle adoption and petrol consumption, evidence of a decrease in fossil fuels for private passenger vehicle market. Can you test whether you're able to share your screen?
Just turn on my voice, then I can see if I can share my screen. It's allowing me to open things or have the option to share. I'm just trying to find the correct one now. That's why. I need to quickly just switch to a different window, and then I should be able to share screen. Share. I haven't used Zoom in a while, so just getting a hang of things, and it should be in presentation mode. So everything
It is
visible on
visible.
your side. Okay,
It is
perfect,
visible.
great. I was busy typing Wanga just a message on the GPR thing, but I'll finish that afterwards. Thank you, everyone. I think Wang covered all the pleasantries, so I'll just observe them and continue with my presentation in the interest of time. So, yeah, Jacobus Nel, University of Pretoria. This is with my supervisor, Professor Rula and Glacy Lots. And we're looking at, well, what's the impact, or can we see any actually? Can we see any, can we observe a decrease in petrol consumption and link that to an increase in EV adoption? And just sort of taking a step backwards, what is sort of the macroeconomic sense? What do you expect to see when there's an increase in electric vehicles? One, you expect to see petroleum consumption to decrease, and then number two, you're expecting to see electricity consumption to increase. Now, we're focusing on the first part of that one in this study. Spoiler alert from a previous part of my PhD, we did find increase in electricity consumption for some countries. But yes, that's luckily not the discussion for today. The annoying bit is this screen is now covering there. Okay, great. It was covering all the information on my slide. So why are countries looking to switch to EVs? Well, it's a part of their effort to decarbonize the transport sector, which many countries have aligned to their nationally determined contributions. And the IAEA is expecting EV sales to reach sort of 17 or have reached 17 million in 2024, which accounted for 20% of vehicle sales. This is, I think, for the whole EV market, not just passenger vehicles. They also project for 2025, now the latest report hasn't been released yet, that this would account for 25% of all vehicles sold. And they're expecting this to have displaced or to increase oil displacement by 30% by 2024. And pushing that further, global demand to decrease by 2030 by 6% or 6 million barrels per day, which would be quite handy given the current oil prices and subsequently fuel prices. Just as a side note, spoke to someone this morning that said person that they know in Australia went to buy an EV the Saturday the war broke out, and then by the Monday when you went to collect the vehicle, they had now a waiting period of 6 months. Just how quickly people have sort of started shifting. So it would be really interesting to see a few years down the line what has the war meant for EV adoption. Just bringing it back to the current presentation, there are some petroleum companies already expecting Shell in the 2020s and BP expecting this towards the end of 2030s. Furthermore, the petroleum industry is expected to become the dominant driver of the global oil demand by 26, so this year. With the refining capacity is also expecting to increase to 2.6 million barrels per day. I'm assuming that's to feed the petroleum chemicals industry as opposed to fuels for transport use. Interestingly, though, they're also expecting the OECD, the demand to shift from OECD to non-OECD countries. as the OECD countries start to decarbonize their transport sector. Just a bit of background. So I'm looking at the European market, which is the second largest EV market behind China. And as such, they're also expected to experience a considerable reduction in oil demand. Policy makers might rejoice at this prospect, but it could also have some implications for electricity grids, which we won't get into. The only thing that I want to mention there is that EV tailpipe emissions, or don't have any tailpipe emissions, but they might be emitting whether electricity is generated if it's not generated using renewable sources. So in South Africa's case, we would then realistically be just displacing emissions from, say, our metro hubs to a different province where the electricity is generated through coal-fired power stations. Additionally, there's an ongoing debate on whether the life cycle emissions from EVs are indeed cleaner than their internal combustion counterparts. Won't touch on that. That's a can of worms I did not want to open in this thesis. But just for interest's sake, at the bottom there's sort of 3 leaders and 3 laggards from the European market for EVs. Interestingly, the sort of your Scandinavian countries leading the charge, and then countries in towards the south of Europe is south and east of Europe is bit slower uptake. This is as a share of total vehicles, passenger vehicles. Then just briefly a literature overview. The literature really started on sort of petroleum or petrol consumption in 1959 study by Kramer, where they're trying to determine, well, what's the path of or what's driving this petrol consumption in 1950 to 53 to 54 survey that they held, or from a household survey, and they basically came to the conclusion those that have private vehicles won't really drive up demand for petrol by just using the vehicle more. It would rather come from more people getting private vehicles. And then from that early sort of research, it then shifts towards more price elasticity research with the 70s oil crisis. And then more recently, it's shifted again towards income elasticities and sort of, well, what's driving the petrol demand? What can we do about it? And also then a bit later onwards, also this topic about decarbonizing the transport sector. So now what I'm doing is I'm basing the theoretical framework is based off of Hotaker's study, which is a partial adjustment model. For instance of time, I'm not going to go through everything there. But basically, it's just petrol consumption is a function of price and income, and then your vehicle stock. But now, number one, I'm not really interested in internal combustion vehicles and what's happening there. I feel like that's a topic that's already been discussed. I'm more interested in EVs. So I'm replacing the internal combustion stock here with electric vehicles. Where we're looking at almost then just having a negative relationship, and which is why you see the electric vehicles pop up in equation 2. And then also expanding on this, we also include population and other control variables, which I will touch on when I get to the results section. But in essence, with a partial adjustment model, you're calculating you're saying that expected or current demand is whatever you expected the demand to be, and also what was the previous period's demand. So basically a dynamic equation. And I'm looking at the country-specific data, so then it's a dynamic panel regression analysis, just the derivation of getting to the final specification. There's a few things here that I will touch on, specifically the move from, well, equation 5 to equation 5. I've got to update the number, with including a post-2020 interaction variable. Then just briefly, I'm not going to go through this whole thing. It's mainly there for if we share the slides online. or if someone watching online later onwards wants to pause and look at where the data comes from. I'm using 20 European countries spanning from 2015 to 2022. The countries are at the bottom for those interested. And then just the reason for ending so in 2022 and not carrying on carrying on. The data from the IEA and specifically the data set I used ends in 2022. And just to get a balanced panel to make the analysis more comparable between the different specifications, I've opted to do that. So firstly, just looking at a comparison of different fixed effects to include here, I've included a whole number of models here, just sort of testing also which model specifications produce different types of results, and also just testing sensitivities to the use of different variables. Then notably, this is only for country fixed effects, although the results for including a regional fixed effect is quite similar, whereas the significance or the sign doesn't change. It's just a slight change in the actual size of the coefficient. Then in models 4 and 5, the results are insignificant. Model 1, it's also insignificant, but it's likely because it's quite an empty model. Then looking the model 2 might also be emitting quite important information in terms of the focus would shift more towards model 6 and 7. And the use for the motivation for including the energy efficient comes from Baltagi and Griffin in their 83 study. And then just the results for the time or year fixed effect included. Now, the interesting thing was that not only did all the significance disappear from the equation, the coefficients turn positive, but also even prices are insignificant here. So there is something that's happening that's sort of got an annual variation that seems to be to not be impacted by country-specific variation. So what could this be? So we turn to the pandemic or the recent pandemic, COVID-19, and then also see that while there was a significant increase in electric vehicle adoption during this period, looking at both the total vehicle sales in the bars and the sales in the bars, and then also the total stock, also the number of EVs on the road in the line graph. And we see there's quite big jumps between these. Now, although going from a relatively low base, there's between 2019 and 2020, EVs sales have doubled, and EV stocks have nearly doubled. So then let's look at, well, including or controlling for this the COVID-19 pandemic period, apologies, and see what the results are doing or what's happening here. So just took the results from the country and regional effects. So that's what all these have. Otherwise, your indicator variable would be absorbed by the annual fixed effects variable, or the control by the fixed effects. We see that the significance is still mainly missing with just having a variable for 2020. Sorry, that should be 2020 or 2019. And also then a post-2020 period, so basically splitting our sample into two periods, 15 to 2019 and then 2020 to 2022. And the results for the other explanatory variables, at least significant again, and they are sensible, meaning a negative for price and a positive for GDP or income. But EVs, the coefficient on EVs do not really make sense. You can't expect an increase in petrol consumption with an increase in EV adoption, all things equal. So let's look at this further. And that's where we introduce the interaction term between electric vehicles and this post-2020 indicator variable. Here we see, so the results here include the annual fixed effects to control for any other potential annual variation that might be not controlled for in the other variables. And again, we see And this is mainly because of the annual fixed effects. The other explanatory variables become insignificant. But interestingly, the interaction term remains negative and statistically significant. And then one other thing that also coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic and also the subsequent lockdowns to restrict movement and the transmission of the disease was the work from home policy and potentially also a transport mode preference shift. So to control for these variables, we use two measures, a survey-based response from employees, whether they usually work from home or sometimes work from home. And through these, the results remain consistent for our interaction term. And just to interpret, well, what does this coefficient actually mean? The main variable here of EVs is electric vehicle share sales, so the sales share, number of sales that from passenger vehicles that represent EVs, and a 1% increase in EV sales share is associated with a reduction in petrol consumption of between 0.011% and 0.037%. Just on how to calculate those, it's the sum of these coefficients because this is only for a certain portion of the year. And then, well, what does that mean in actual values? So if we consider the average European country and their consumption and EV sales share, an increase from 3.57% to 3.61% corresponds to a decrease of petrol consumption of between 7.3 kiloliters and 24.6 kiloliters for an average European country. And then just to conclude, countries have been pushing for this electric vehicle adoption mainly because they don't have any tailpipe emissions. And this is regardless of what the source of the electricity is. It doesn't mean that there aren't no emissions from using the vehicle, just nothing at the point of use. Then a higher EV adoption will decrease petrol consumption and increase electricity consumption, as I mentioned earlier, all things equal. And we estimate the elasticity of the demand for petrol. Yeah, I've gone through that. We find evidence of a negative relationship. However, this is not robust to the inclusion of the year fixed effects. To address this, we include the interaction term, and we find that these results, this results in a negative and statistically significant coefficient, which is robust against work from home shifts and also a potential modal shift. Just an important to note is that the results can't be interpreted as causal because there's likely endogeneity between petrol prices and EV adoption, as I mentioned earlier with the story about Australian buying a vehicle and then a 6-month waiting list the day after the weekend after you bought it. And then just furthermore, the results show the importance of controlling for lockdowns or the movement restrictions associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm assuming in the next few years the same will hold with the war in Iran. Yes, any questions?
Well, I'm happy to have questions, and I'm happy to. Leila, please.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Very interesting presentation. I was wondering how did you deal with hybrid vehicles? I don't know how common these are in Europe, but
so the data sets do include them, but I have purely looked at EVs for this study because hybrid vehicles would still be consuming petrol, but just less of it. So my interest was purely in the electric vehicle side of things, yes.
yeah, thank you.
Any others, questioners? So I have a couple myself. First of all, you referred to the predictions by the oil majors for peak oil, I think it was, to use shorthand. But as I recall in that slide, the predictions were made in 2019.
Correct.
And I think things have changed quite a bit since then, because the predictions at that time were that peak oil could be reached as early as sometime in the late 2020s. In fact, BP was talking about, 2025, possibly. So I think that has changed quite a bit. And if we take a look at the divestitures and restructurings in these oil companies that were dabbling in renewables, not necessarily EVs, but things have changed quite a bit. So you might want to have a look at update that. With respect to COVID, the COVID effect, I think that's actually quite complicated, because at least where I live, COVID drove people away from public transit. And that effect sustained itself. So we had higher congestion and potentially, as a result, higher purchases of cars, some of which would have trickled into the EV segment of the market. And so those are comments. The last point is a question. If I understood correctly, the fixed effects model effectively reduces the magnitude and the significance of other coefficients. Am I right about that? Of certain key coefficients?
Yes, correct. And that's only when including an annual fixed effect, correct?
Okay.
Yeah, year fixed effect.
So I don't find that surprising. These fixed effects actually really do kill the inter country, in this case, variation effects. And so my inclination when thinking about papers that are written in this way is you want to present both sets of results and try to backfill why it is you think that the fixed effects have drowned out these other discerning coefficients that you're really interested in.
Yes, and I think it's also partly due to sort of the integrated nature of my sample countries being all in Europe, mostly in the European Union. So it's almost like they're all growing at the same trend, just sort of horizontally or spaced equally, parallelly spaced. And so with combination with sort of just country fixed effects and then the annual fixed effects, you're rightly saying you're absorbing all of the variation in there. There's no sort of country-specific trends or anything seemingly, or from the data. It's quite difficult to plot 20 countries on the same graph to see what's happening.
Indeed. No, if there are no other questions, I will pass on the baton to my friend and colleague, Leila.
Thank you. So the third paper will be presented by Monica Pereira Enrique from the University of Luxembourg. And the paper is titled Optimal Carbon Pricing for Green Hydrogen Adoption, Insights from a Firm Production Model. And it's co-authored with Boris Ortega and Gilbert Fridgen. Not sure I'm pronouncing this correct. Monica, yeah, okay, we can see that.
So can you see my screen now?
Yes.
I'm so sorry from the little technical issue before. I don't know why. It has always worked before and now it just like bugged. Okay, so thank you for presenting me very quickly. I'm Monica, first year PhD, and as mentioned, I'm a PhD student at the University of Luxembourg, more specifically for the Interdisciplinary Center for Security, Reliability and Trust, SNT. And here I will be then presenting a work in progress, which the paper will be named Carbon Pricing for Green Hydrogen Adoption, Insights from a Firm Production Model. So first, we'll start with a little introduction, more especially the motivation.
Sorry, Monica, can you go to full screen mode?
I am in full screen mode. I don't know. I am like full screen mode if I click on it. Can you still see my presentation or not?
No, now I can't see anything, basically. Just
okay, wait.
Just seeing
I also have a cat like always jumping on me. I'm so sorry. Wait, I will maybe stop once the sharing and start again. What about
this? Yes, this is
okay.
Very good.
Sorry again. Okay, so as I was saying, we'll start with the motivation behind our research question. And our research question was more motivated by the goal of the European Union, that is to be carbon neutral in 2050. And here, the EU also concentrates and puts a lot of focus on hydrogen, saying, okay, this is one way to decarbonize our industry, and they put a more emphasis on the green hydrogen. And here, in this figure, you can see how it is with hydrogen in 2020 and how it is to be in 2050 based on a 1.5 degree scenario. So in 2020, you can see that the energy consumption, which is the graph on the left side, you can see that there's not a lot of hydrogen. It's mostly fossil fuels, electricity, biomass, and other stuff. And then for 2050, you can see that hydrogen pops up with 14%. And with this 14%, 94% should be renewable hydrogen. The same goes for the EU in the way of that right now, there's only 2% of hydrogen in the energy consumption. And of these 2%, only 4% are green hydrogen, and the rest is fossil hydrogen. So here we can see that as of right now, green hydrogen deployment remains very limited. And also, okay, it remains limited, but we still need like the hydrogen in order to achieve our goal, especially that the EU set the goal of 10% also of green hydrogen in the economy, in energy in 2050. And here is a graph from the International Renewable Energy Agency, which shows one of the problems, or a lot of the problems, of why the hydrogen remains limited, especially the green one. And it says production cost is the problem. Okay, so knowing that the cost, and especially compared to conventional energy sources like oil, renewables, the deployment then remains very limited. So the challenge here is also to see, okay, when does green hydrogen become competitive? We also take a look at the literature to see what is there already about it. And there's literature about carbon pricing and its effect on the green hydrogen competitiveness. They all agree on one thing: it has a positive effect, meaning that if there's carbon pricing and it goes higher, it will be better for the deployment of hydrogen. And at one point, it will also then support also the industrial fuel switching. But they do not say, okay, on this particular carbon price level, it will be good for green hydrogen. Firm will switch to green hydrogen. And also, it is important to note that papers that like ask also the papers that look into the carbon pricing and its effect on the green hydrogen competitiveness, they also focus a lot on technology costs, and they ignore a lot the firm level substitution behavior, which is what we are going to be concentrating on this paper. So for this paper, our research question will be the following one: at what carbon price threshold does green hydrogen become competitive within industrial production systems? And for that, we'll model how the carbon pricing will then shape the switching from the firm, and especially industry firm. And also, with this model, we'll then estimate firm level carbon price thresholds for green hydrogen competitiveness. So there we'll see, okay, what is the threshold? At what point from carbon price level will firms then switch for more green hydrogen? And the contribution will then be that we'll then estimate a threshold for when it becomes competitive, and also will then capture when does the firm will be substituted for more green hydrogen. And therefore, we'll then present with policy relevant thresholds. So we'll take a look now at the model. It will be a production model, so we'll be mostly focusing on firm. So here we have a producer that needs to do production, and in order to do production, it uses energy, capital, and labor. These three are all linked in a Cobb-Douglas function, but the energy will be then split in other sources. We have the green hydrogen one, we have the renewables, we have oil and natural gas. Here, the main question is carbon pricing. So we need to also fix when or which fuel will be impacted by those carbon pricing. And here we say, okay, the green hydrogen and the renewable one, which are clean energy, will not be impacted by carbon pricing. And oil and natural gas, which are more fossil fuels, they will be impacted by carbon pricing. So here, it's also important to note that the producer cannot produce any of those energies. They can only buy it at the market. So they will need to pay the price. So the price will then be impacted by the carbon pricing for the two sources like oil, natural gas, and not for renewables and green hydrogen. And we then need also to define this threshold. And for that, we go to the fuel switching literature, which Bertrand in 2014 says, okay, this threshold will be defined when marginal costs of two fuels are equal. So if we so this indifference threshold is when a firm is also indifferent between using one fuel or the other fuel. So here, when green hydrogen marginal cost equals the other alternative fuel marginal cost, then the firm will be indifferent between using green hydrogen or the other alternative. And here then, if the carbon pricing exceeds that indifferent threshold, that is where green hydrogen will then become preferable compared to the alternatives. And also we have a production side model, and we are using production functions, and we still need to calibrate them. And in order to calibrate them, especially the factor shares from our production functions, we need also data. And for that, we'll be using the observed energy prices that we found on oil, natural gas, and also the cost of production for hydrogen, since there's no real price yet data for green hydrogen. And we'll also look at observed energy consumption data. And it will be mostly to represent a stylized industry flow from Luxembourg, and the data goes from 2022 to 2024 due to the lack of data for green hydrogen. And here we have some calibrating results to see if our model is working good or not. And this is the calibration results for a Cobb Douglas when the energy are all linked into a Cobb Douglas. And there we can see that our models like underestimates natural gas, but overestimates oil. But this is to be awaited since it's a Cobb Douglas and the elasticity of substitution equals to 1. But even though there's that difference, our results on thresholds remain robust. So here we have the first production function that we estimated, which is the Cobb Douglas one. And here on the x-axis, you can see the carbon tax that will go from 0 to 2,500 euro per ton of CO2. And in the y-axis, we have the quantity of the different forms of energies. The threshold happens when two lines cross each other. For example, here, the blue color, I'm sorry if anyone is colorblind and cannot see which one is the blue. I'm so sorry about that. But when they cross each other, this is where the threshold is. And you can see that for the threshold between green hydrogen and oil, it will happen at more or less approximately at 180 euros. And for the green hydrogen and natural gas, it will be higher. It will be at 1,200 euros. Which is also another thing to note here is that we see that also for renewables, it will increase their share. The firms will use way more renewables also. This is for the first production function. Also, this study uses different kind of production functions to see different results. And we then also switch to a constant elasticity of substitution with a nested Cobb Douglas. And there we have then the elasticity of substitution that pops up in this production function. And here the result that we found right now is that if it is easier to substitute between clean energy and fossil energy, we'll see that the carbon price thresholds will become lower and lower. If there's easier substitution, the carbon price threshold will be lower with hydrogen and between hydrogen and gas and hydrogen and oil. And the last function that we use is a two-level CES function. And there we have three types of elasticity of substitution. And we also wanted to see the impact of them. So we'll only be moving one and the rest remains constant just to see how does this elasticity of substitution impacts. And for that, we have the first one, elasticity of substitution that we are changing, which is between clean and fossil energy, which is the same as before with the CS, nested Cobb Douglas. And we find the same result, which means that if there's easier substitution, we found that the carbon price threshold gets lower for both of the carbon threshold between green hydrogen and oil and natural gas. And then we have another elasticity of substitution that comes, which is the one between natural gas and oil. If there is easier substitution between natural gas and oil, we see that the threshold for green hydrogen versus natural gas becomes lower and higher for hydrogen versus oil. This just also is can also be seen explained by the fact that, okay, first the firms will first switch to oil when they go from natural gas to oil, and then they will switch to green hydrogen. And then the last elasticity of substitution, which is between renewables and hydrogen, we find out that if there's higher substitution between renewables and hydrogen, the carbon price threshold will be higher, which then also can be explained by the fact that firms will first switch to renewables before ever switching to green hydrogen. So the conclusion of these preliminary results is that the carbon price thresholds are high. The lowest that we found at the moment is at 180 euros and are also linked to the model or the production function that we are using. Then I mentioned that the lowest is at 180, and if we compare to the ones that are here in Europe, the carbon taxes, which is Sweden with 138, we see that we are still very above those levels that already exist. And especially this model is calibrated for Luxembourg, and right now at Luxembourg, we are only at 45 euros. So we are quite far away from the threshold. And on these preliminary results, we can see, okay, green hydrogen will not be a direct substitute because there's also literature saying, okay, green hydrogen can be a good substitute for natural gas. But with these results, we can see that it's not a direct substitute. And also it will be mostly then a complementary technology. So what do we learn from here, from this results, is that carbon pricing alone is not enough if you want to boost the competitiveness of green hydrogen. There needs to be other types of instruments, like, for example, we need to lower the cost of producing green hydrogen so it lowers the price, or even green hydrogen will also need electricity and maybe then lower the price of electricity in order for green hydrogen to be less higher the price. Also, this model right now is a simplified model of the economy here in Luxembourg, and we also want to expand it a bit more in the fact that we want to maybe say, okay, they can produce renewables with solar panels, for example, or even we want to say, okay, electricity, they will have electricity, which will be renewable and fossil, the alternatives one that are more fossil, like with carbon and stuff. And this part will be done with carbon pricing, and the ones from renewable will not have carbon pricing, to see also the results. So I thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and also your feedback.
Anyone has any questions?
Yeah, if I can have a question, please. Thank you very much for the presentation, Monica, and winning the fight against the cat. Well done.
She's very small. She's not even 2 months, so she's very clingy yet.
Yeah, good. Well done. Can you just try to explain in different words again when you use the nested Cobb-Douglas, what you mean by the threshold with the carbon dioxide price? I got a little bit confused there because they need to be equal, then the consumers are indifferent, and then I did not quite understand where you showed the ranking between the two energy technologies basically that were used was presented.
So your question is more linked to the
yes, indeed.
So here is the same definition for the threshold, which means the firms are indifferent between using green hydrogen and oil, for example, when the marginal costs are equal. But the marginal cost will also depend on the elasticity of substitution. Mm. And we played with different kind of values with elasticity of substitution, which is right now we don't have a real value yet. We'll also in the future try to have a real value for the elasticity of substitution to be more clear how it is for Luxembourg. And we noticed that if it gets higher, if it's easier to substitute between between the fossil fuels and clean energies, we notice that the thresholds will be lower, which means, okay, if, for example, the carbon price threshold is at 100,172 euros, this is where the firms will be different between using oil and green hydrogen. And if the carbon price is higher than this 1,172, then the firm will switch to green hydrogen and will leave the oil behind.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes it everything clearer.
Well, slightly. But thank you.
Anyone else?
If you want, I can also show you the equation if it would help understand behind it. Okay.
Please do.
Okay, please do. Okay, I will show you. So for the nested Cobb-Douglas, which here is the firm problem. So it will maximize, of course, its profit, and it will also be then under constraint of the production function and also the energy. And here you can see that the energy one is then a nested Cobb-Douglas with a CS linking them both. And from there, we'll then first compute the first order of conditions, which will have 6 in total, which is 1 per fuel and also labor and capital. And from there, you can see, for example, on equation 17, you see that this is the first order condition for gas. You can see that there's the tau C, which is then the carbon pricing. And the rest is still in the first order of condition. And here, we then put everything to a common denominator, because here you can see on the hydrogen, which is equation 16, they all have in common the YT. PT, YT, they all have that in common. So you put it everything on one side, and then you equal them both. And then there you can isolate the carbon tax, which is tau C. And from there, you will also notice that the elasticity of substitution, which is here noted by the rho parameter, and then when we put other values on that elasticity of substitution, we'll then have different kind of values for this carbon tax threshold. And
So-
here, if you want to see the exact results, these are the ones. The equation 21 is when the firm is indifferent between using green hydrogen and gas, and the second one is for green hydrogen and petrol.
So based on your analyses, do you have policy implications that, or scenario associated with scenarios, for example?
The policy implication here is that first, unless you put very high carbon price, it will not very benefit the competitiveness. It will benefit the competitiveness of green hydrogen, but not enough. So you need to couple it with other type of instruments, like for example, subsidize the production of green hydrogen, or to build a whole new, it's not an industry, but the whole side of production of green hydrogen, since the costs are very high. Or also one way that I saw on the literature is to reduce, for example, for green hydrogen, the price of electricity. So they will have lower electricity prices in order to produce this green hydrogen.
So there's this bifurcation in the hydrogen literature analysis. On the one hand, we see hydrogen as being a very efficient way to store non-dispatchable electricity by using it to create hydrogen, and then you store it cheaply. But there's also literature that says that that's not a practical pathway. That hydrogen, to the extent that it will be used in replacing carbon-intensive, modifying carbon-intensive industrial production. I don't know whether it's cement or steel or what. Is that something that you've thought about or taken into account here?
Yes, we are also thinking of maybe splitting, because right now it's firms in general, and maybe we want to split it sector-wise because it may have different results. Especially here in Luxembourg, we have a lot of steel. We have ArcelorMittal here, and we also want to put later also sector-wise. Right now, it's just like a baseline to see what we can expect as results, and then we'll like try to make it better, more representative, and even like split into sectors.
If Leila, if I have time to express one more thought.
I think we do, right, Anne? Yeah.
So just an observation. I tend to be very, I'm not going to say skeptical, but certainly nervous about looking at long-term projections. We're now at 2025, and I see many, many projections extending out to 2050. And then I ask myself, in 2000, what were we saying about hydrocarbons and the price of oil? And the price of oil was forecasted to hit $200 or more. And in the interim, we had this game-changing revolution, the fracking revolution, that completely upturned markets. And so that's why, looking forward, we don't know which innovation is going to be game-changing. I suspect it is going to be in storage, but it could very well completely alter our thinking about even what we should invest in and whether we should be expanding grids at the rate that we're talking about, other than for data centers, but that we're talking about because of EVs, for example. Mm-hmm. So that's where I have reservations about long-term predictions.
Yeah, that's why we also tried to stay like foot down in a way of we looked at what the EU has been imposing, and they imposed the 10% of green hydrogen in the economy. So that's our projection. I know maybe later they will change, but at least right now it's like, okay, 2050, 10%. So we need to make it happen. And this is maybe showing a way of how you can help make it happen to reach that goal that you fixed.
Thank you.
I guess we are done for the session.
Yeah, so thank you. I'm taking the lead here again, right? So we have made up all the time that we lost in the beginning. That is excellent work, which should, however, not stop you from asking questions, right? Oscar, if you have a question, Wiesel, if you have a question, Hilda, Endre, anybody else, it's not about us old people asking questions. It's about you also asking questions. No? Okay, I'm not going to put this any further. Then I will thank everybody. I'm I'm a little bit overwhelmed now because, again, I don't know the program. I don't think there's a break. Is there a break?